Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Fat Minute. I am, of course, your host, Don John, joined tonight by my co-host, the man with no name, BVJ.
But you just said it.
I'm sorry, I was thinking on the fly here. I forgot to come up with a intro for you earlier. That's my B. I peed.
Well, well. Speaking of flies, I'm going to get to my favorite punchline at the end of the episode.
And well, speaking of this episode, for those who don't know, we are continuing with our review of our one of our favorite TV shows, Frasier, with episode 3 from season 1, Dinner at 8. And yeah, this is a favorite episode of both of us. You go ahead and talk about how much this episode is loved amongst your family.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil one of the jokes at the end of the episode, but I'm just going to have to go ahead and do it. Um, I love this episode. My dad and mom love this episode, especially my dad. Like he like it tickles the shit out of him, especially the final scene, which I will take the lead on at the end of this episode. And I realized how much my pop loved this episode because I didn't. Unfortunately, I did not see this episode until after my pop had passed away, and thus we were no longer watching Frasier together. But every time I would go to Roy Rogers with Pop, they had
Hmm.
the little like salad bar, toppings bar in the middle of the dining room, and it was
Yeah.
called Roy's Fixins Bar. And every time Pop would read it out loud, he'd laugh. He would say the Fixins Bar, and I'm like, why does he think that's so funny? And fast forward, they mention that with their steaks at the end of this episode, their meals, they get all the fixins on it, and it finally clicked. I was like, oh, that's why Pop thought it was funny because it reminded him of this episode, the fixins. So yeah, that's really just I don't know. It's I think
It's a very wholesome memory.
yes, yes, and I think onto this episode. I think this episode, even more so than the first two episodes, because we talked about, especially the opening scene of the first episode being like the perfect introduction,
Hmm.
and then we talked about how the final scene of the second episode, the previous episode, is honestly a better ending to the pilot than the actual ending to the pilot episode.
Hmm.
And with this episode, we finally truly get a much more concrete, mapped out diagram of the differences between the two boys and their father. Like this
Oh,
one
absolutely.
really highlights their divide more than the previous two episodes. Like we really get a taste for okay, so this is their dynamic. Um
Absolutely.
I'll
And
give it to you.
yeah, and I mean, all that you just said 100% accurate on this episode. And this is also, I feel, the first episode where the ghost of their deceased mother is really present in this episode. And I feel like this is also the first episode where, like, because, first episode, second episode, we got, like, an idea of how Niles and Frasier viewed their mother. But this is, like, the first episode where we really get to see how Martin viewed his wife and what she meant to him. Um, and that also
Yeah.
just plays into what you said about their dynamic with each other.
Hmm.
So, yeah, let's go ahead and jump into this episode. Season 1, episode 3, Dinner at 8. And the episode just opens up with Frasier doing his job at the radio station. He's got a call from a lady named Pam who's talking about how her in-laws, her husband's mother and father, always coming around to visit, and they just don't want to hang out with them. And so far, they've gotten to the point to where every time they come over, they just immediately hide. They get on the floor and just hide from the windows. And it's really funny because like as Frasier's being like, well, maybe you should try talking to them. It's like, well, we don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, you can either crawl around on the carpet forever, or you can hurt their feelings.
Hmm.
Um, and as he's saying that, like the doorbell rings. She's like, oh my God, they're here. And she gets down and Frasier's whispering with her, and he's like, oh, why am I whispering?
Yeah. He's like, oh, for God's sake.
And I just love after the call hangs up, there's a like Roz signals that like, hey, we need to go to break, and Fraser, it's so lame and petty, but I got a good laugh out of the joke where he said, as Pam belly crawls across the floor, enjoy this advertisement from Carpet Fresh. And it's like, how's
That
that for a segue?
that was 101% a you or me moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I really like about this scene is using like Frasier at work as a cold open like that. It really gives you like because you got the good and witty humor, and also I feel like this is the first episode where we really see Frasier like really hitting his stride at his job at the radio station and enjoying it. Because the first two episodes he's still like getting used to it and still really awkward at it, but like
Hmm.
this one he's really like he's hit his rhythm, he's confident about it, and he's having a good time about it. So that combined with some good humor, some witty jokes here and there, it really helps like ease you into like the real plot of this episode. Like it brings you in nice and easy. You get a couple
Hmm.
good laughs in, you're comfortable and you're settled and you're ready for the real story of this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, and to build on like you admiring like using Frasier's job as a cold open, the fact that we get to see him at work and actually, do his work,
Hmm.
it really does. We really do get a feel for this character living a life.
Yes.
Um, with so many other stuff, it's like, it just feels a little unrealistic how it always cuts to the fun parts of them just hanging out or doing the characters doing whatever they want, like in Friends, like
I was about to
how
say
the
this ain't Friends, motherfucker.
no, it's not Friends, and it's also like I just feel like that problem carries over into so many kids that I've had to work with, um, in real life.
Hmm.
How like they're always calling out, or they're cutting their hours and stuff like that, and it's like God, don't they ever get tired of like not wanting to don't they ever get tired of having to bum money off their parents, and don't they ever want to have play money or folding money to mess around with? And I'm like, well,
Okay,
it's almost
boomer.
like they just yeah, I know, I'm sorry, but I'm like, well, it's almost like they've watched too much Friends and they just want to live in a sitcom where they're only at work for like a scene or two, and then it just cuts straight to them doing whatever the fuck they want for the rest of their day. I
What
totally went on
what
an. I totally
what? Go ahead.
go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, now that you mention it, what were like the like Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox's characters like? What were their jobs? Like honestly, like 80% of that cast. I know Matt LeBlanc's character was like an actor, and David Schwimmer was like an archaeologist or a
He was a
paleontologist. But like, yeah,
paleontologist.
what
Yeah.
the fuck was everybody else's job in that show?
Well, that's the point. And like again, I'm sorry for going on like derailing onto a boomer rant or whatever. It was like these damn kids, but it's like that is true. It's like so many other shows. It's like you don't really get a sense that they're living a life, that they're
Yeah,
It's just it's always like cut to the bullshit.
right.
And or like in Seinfeld, like Jerry Seinfeld has that nice ass apartment off of just working like a few minutes stand up every Friday and Saturday night, and he's able to afford that nice ass New York apartment. Like, give me a fucking break.
Yeah,
Like,
as somebody who did quite a lot of stand up, yeah, you're right. Give me a fucking break.
yeah, you never hear about him like trying to make rent or being nervous about picking up like another side shift or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, he just does a few minutes at the local cellar club like every weekend, and he's just able to have that like that same ass apartment week after week, month after month. It's
In the
like,
in the middle of New York City.
yeah, and it's like, don't talk down to us.
Yeah.
But also, there's that one famous Reddit post now where like the his apartment is physically impossible when it cuts to like how the hallway is and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a pretty good post. But yes, the point that I was trying to make was I love that we get a sense of Frasier's life both at home and at work. And it's
Yeah.
not like, oh great, I bet all the work scenes are boring as shit. Like, no, they're great too, and
Yeah.
they're just relevant, and it's also just about narrative and foreshadowing.
Right.
So continue.
Well, then after that, we move right into the next scene where they're at home, and Frasier comes home with Martin, who has just, Frasier just bought Martin a new suit, and he's all excited to try it out, show it to Daphne. And I love the little bit there where Daphne's like fluffing his underwear, and Frasier's like, "What the hell? Don't touch my underwear!" Oh my God, how did you get it so soft?
Yeah, yeah.
And then this is a really funny moment is when he gets a call from Niles, like, "Oh yeah, sure, Niles, you can come over," and just quietly, silently walks over to the door and opens the door, and there's Niles on his phone at the door. Um, that bit really does a great job of building up Niles as like a mega version of Frasier.
Yeah,
Because we've mentioned so many times before about how Niles out Frasier's Frasier, and this is like the pinnacle of that. Like, this is
yeah.
absolutely Frasier times 1,000.
I just
Um,
love how, judging by hearing the audience like slowly laughing more and more, I just love how as soon as Frasier hangs up the phone and starts walking straight to the door, the
mhm,
audience already knew what the joke was gonna be.
yeah, and it didn't make it any less funny.
Yeah,
But this is also where when Niles and Daphne first meet, and Niles is just immediately stricken to the point that he becomes stupid. And the second they meet, you immediately know, like, oh, this is going to be one of those sitcom romances.
yeah.
And in some ways it is, but also I will say, and we'll get into it as we move along in the series and we get to the relevant episodes about it, but I'll just go on the record now and say that I feel like Niles and Daphne's relationship is like, as far as sitcoms go, is one of the most maybe realistic, but also like one of the most like well developed relationships in TV
It
history.
it does, like, by the time it finally happens, like, spoiler alert, but the show's, fucking 30 years old.
Yeah,
When it does finally happen, it does feel much more earned and deserved than other sitcom romances of the saga of Will They Won't They.
absolutely.
So, yeah.
It doesn't feel like a magic wand was waved, but
Yeah. No.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get more into that when we get to those relevant episodes. But yeah, Niles and Daphne first meet, and Niles is immediately, just head over heels for her. And Martin comes out with his new suit, and just Niles is just, wow, what do you think? Wow. And
Yeah.
it's funny because it's honestly a pretty good looking suit. Like, I don't know,
Eh,
maybe if this episode was filmed in like 4K HD today, maybe it wouldn't look as good, but it
I,
looks
I could
fine.
cer- I could certainly see how, in the eyes of Frasier and Niles, it is an eyesore.
Yeah, I mean, I was it's the main thing about it is that it's shark skin, which is just sounds uncomfortable.
It it
Um,
it, it truly is the suit version of Marty's couch, or chair, I should say, recliner.
yeah, and I just love like Marty's just obviously like in love with it. He's like, look, it's shark skin. See how it changes colors when I move my arm? And I love the fucking line that really killed me is when he's going back to his room to put it away, and Daphne says, "Yeah, you don't want it to get wrinkled." He's like, "Oh, it's supposed to resist wrinkles." The shop had one stuffed in a mayonnaise jar.
And like Frasier is like so like wounded by the reality of him being impressed by that.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on, as you said, like, this being the first time, the first scene that that Niles and Daphne share with each other. Like, they finally meet in this scene.
Hmm.
And not just that, but that's half of my point. It's that mixed with, I'm pretty sure that this episode, the three cranes are share more scenes that they did in the first two episodes. Like, a lot of Niles' scenes in the first episode and second episode just felt like he was stopping in to check on Frasier in between all of him dealing with their father.
Yeah.
And so with Niles and Daphne finally meeting, and then Martin, Frasier, and Niles actually sharing the same scene much more. Like, this episode really felt like, if the first two episodes was the ignition and the car starting, this episode was really the car starting to drive.
Yeah.
Starting to go
Yeah.
down the street. Like, now we're finally moving along. You know what I'm saying? So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
But after Martin goes to put his suit away, Niles and Fraser start talking about like, how can we be related to this man? He is nothing like us. And they get talking like, well, we did take after mom more. It's like, well, how come, some of mom's tastes and personality didn't rub off on dad? And Fraser says, well, maybe he was just busy working so hard, so we were able to enjoy the finer things, and maybe we should pay him back and expose him to some of this stuff. Or as Fraser puts it, show him the world that he's only read about in TV Guide. Um, and I love this little exchange because it really shows how, like, throughout this whole series, Fraser and Niles are pompous, but they're also good natured because the whole, like, well, why don't we expose him to the finer things in life, pay him back, for working so hard? It's like, well, that's just not who Martin is. You're not really doing him a favor like you think you are.
right.
But again, it's also good natured because it's like, well, Dad did all this stuff for us. Let's do something for him.
Yeah, yeah,
And I also
100%.
love I also love this little exchange between these two, between Frasier and Niles, really shows how the humor of this show is very witty and very clever, but it's never niche. You know, like it's got a lot of like we'll say intellectual humor to it that a lot of like mainstream audiences might not get the context to, but you don't really need to know the context to get the joke. Like for example, there's a line here where Frasier says to Niles like, "Oh, remember when you thought the 1812 Overture was a good piece of music?" And Niles is like, "Oh, was I ever that young?"
Yeah, yeah,
It's like you don't need to know what the 1812 Overture is. You don't need to know any of that. It's just funny.
yeah. It's just them being high class petty.
Yeah. And they get talking like, well, where can we take that? What's a good place? Let's go, take him out to dinner. Where's a good place to take him? And they settle on Les Cigars Volants, which is French for the flying cigar, for those who don't know. Yeah,
Still
um,
funny.
it's still funny. But of course, they're like, Niles like, I've been trying to get in for months. Frasier, with his, his celebrity, calls up the restaurant and manages to get a reservation for Thursday at 8. And Martin comes out. They try to sell him on the idea. And I love the little line Martin has here. And I relate to it so much is when Niles says, come on, Dad, you got to try it. The food is to die for. No, son. Your family and your country is to die for. Food is to eat. Like, that is like an ultimate level dad joke. And I love it.
Yeah.
But they convince Martin, okay, we'll go to dinner at this fancy restaurant of yours. And we move into the next scene, and it's just a little scene at the station where Roz and Frasier are getting ready for, the show. It's Monday. And I do love the little line here where Frasier's like, what do we have? And Roz is like, we got a whole bunch of, like, people suffering from, like, real problems, really, like, depressing problems. And just Frasier, oh, I love a Monday. And then just Roz also telling Frasier about her date with a strange guy who has a extreme fear of touching anything sticky. Um,
And which was, mind you, which was an ad that she answered.
Yeah, Roz, where do you find these people? I answered his ad, which, fun fact, that is how my mom and stepfather met. So,
Holy shit! I didn't remember that.
yeah, if I remember correctly, he put an ad in the paper and she like answered it, or she put an ad in the paper and he answered it. I mean, it was the mid '90s. There was no internet, so I guess that's what you had to do.
I mean, I guess like we could only roast that for so much because we used apps.
Right.
So I guess that was just their
It's it,
generation's.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
ultimately the same thing, but if if you know my parents like Blake does, it really just adds fuel to that fire.
yeah. Jesus Christ, I'm gonna stop there.
But and this is like a really this scene with Frasier and Ross at the station. It's so weird that it's like it almost feels like it was just added in there to like pad the episode to fill the time slot. Um, because once they have that little exchange, that's it. The scene's over. And then we move back to Frasier's apartment, and this is where it's like I feel like at this point they're still like I think you're right in the sense of like this episode is where the car is actually on the road and moving, but I feel like they're still trying to figure out what to do with Roz, like how far they want to push Roz as a character.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah,
yeah, like
I didn't even notice that until you just said that.
yeah,
But
like
yeah.
the car is on the road, but Roz is not allowed to touch the radio.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
So we move into the next scene. We're back at Frasier's apartment. And I just love Frasier coming out in the suit, and Daphne, she says to Frasier, "Oh, don't you look like a Bobby Dazzler?" And Frasier just pauses. Well, I'm just gonna take that as a compliment, I guess. And Niall shows up. Maris, his wife, is not with him because she had a quote episode. And I just love what Niall says. The second she sat at the edge of the bed and sighed, I knew dinner was not going to happen.
I think we all knew someone that has had to deal with that shit before.
Yep. And just I love how
That,
Niles.
that's a that's a
Go ahead.
flashback to. I'm sorry. That's a flashback to a certain night when we went to Denny's and a certain person showed up already pissed off, and my only answer was, "Oh, I'm sorry that my text came off that way. I certainly didn't mean it that way." And
She
they just
cried.
kept walking. They just kept walking in a certain way, and you knew to say to yourself, "Oh, it's going to be one of those nights."
Yes, sir.
Ugh.
But Niles immediately wastes no time to use Maris's absence as an excuse to flirt with Daphne. Uh, Shows up with some British candy for her. Says he got it for their dad. I just love how like Frasier's just like having none of it. He's like, oh really, Niles?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, the second Daphne walks away to put the candy in the fridge, just Frasier just like, what are you doing?
I just it doesn't happen in this scene. I'm pretty sure. I think it happened in the scene where they actually meet. But I just love when she does the I'm getting a reading on you or something, and Niles is like he doesn't have the context for what she's doing,
Oh, it happens
and
this scene.
it happens this scene.
Yeah,
Frasier just I just love how she does her psychic thing, and she's
yeah.
like, I'm getting something from you, and he goes, I'm sorry, what? And Frasier said he sums it up as so perfectly. Oh, also she's psychic, and
We've
we've
decided to
just
find it.
decided that it's charming.
Yeah. And I was gonna bring that up too because I feel like that line just sums up pretty much like the general feeling towards Daphne as a person. Just we've just decided to find her charming.
Yeah, yeah,
And I just love how she's like, you have random bouts of colitis, don't you? Niles is like, oh my god, yes. And Daphne leaves to go off to her poker game with her friends. And Fraser, you've never had a case of colitis in your life. I know, but I couldn't let her down.
yeah. So good.
And I love, at this point, Martin finally comes out into the living room. He's not wearing his suit, which apparently Les Cigar Volant has a dress code. And fucking Martin just says, I got some cream chicken on it at the retirement party last night. You can't keep anything nice. So,
That was a fucking Phil moment.
yeah.
You
Yes.
can't keep anything nice.
So of course Fraser calls up the restaurant to get an idea what the minimum dress code is, only to find out that the restaurant lost their reservation entirely. So they're like, well, damn, what are we gonna do now? It's Saturday, 8 o'clock. We're not gonna be able to get in any. It's Thursday, 8 o'clock. We're not gonna be able to get in anywhere. So Martin's just like, hey, why don't I take you guys to the Sawmill? You get a steak this thick for $8. You all right?
Just of course he likes a restaurant called the fucking Sawmill.
Yeah. You can get a steak this thick for $8, and they give you 5 different kinds of toppings for your baked potato. And of course, Fraser and Niles are just like, "Oh, that doesn't sound like our kind of place." Which, Martin, the master of throwing their shit right back at them. Hey, I was willing to go to your place, and they're still like, "Well, no, let's just take a rain check." And fucking Martin starts limping to the kitchen.
Yeah.
They're like, "All right, Dad, you're right. Let's go." So they go to the Sawmill, and that leads us to the final scene, which I'll let you take over.
Oh god, I love this fucking scene. So they're walking down the steps from the entrance, and and, and Martin introduces the pig, being like, "Isn't this place just the coolest? This used to be a real working sawmill." And Fraser goes, "Yeah." And then somebody had the obvious thought of, "Hey, let's turn it into a restaurant."
I also
So
love
then,
the line that Niles has about like, "Oh, the smell here is really, making me think of something." Oh yeah, Maris in her tanning bed.
yes. And so they get down, and Fraser says to the waitress, "Oh, you wouldn't happen to have a table for three, would you?" And you could just hear in his voice that he was really hoping that they'd be in their favor, shit out of luck.
Yeah.
He was hoping for a last ditch. "Oh, I'm sorry, we're packed full," but unfortunately, they had room for them. And she comes up and she says, the hostess, I should say, says, "Oh, but just to let you know, we actually have a dress code here." And they automatically assume that they mean their father. He goes, "Well, I mean, couldn't you understand? His suit was at the cleaners." And they go, "Not him, you." They take their ties and they cut them off.
Mm.
And I'm sorry, like, it's other people would think it's funny. My mom and I were like, what if that was like a super expensive ass tie? Like, I'd be pissed off as shit.
Yeah, I'm
And
I'm definitely with you and Fraser and Niles on that one. Even if it wasn't an expensive ass tie, it could be like a $5 tie. Like, don't
yeah,
fucking wreck my shit.
Yeah, like and also like I'm sorry, I know it's a sitcom. I don't mean to think too far into it, but like what if it's like that was the last thing my grandfather gave me before he died or something like that? Like what a shitty thing.
Hey,
But
I mean,
anyway.
you can't keep anything nice.
Yeah. I'm gonna need your help with the name of the drink that Niles ordered, but they
Oh
sit
my
down
God,
and Niles
this
orders
drinks,
his
these drinks.
I'll go into the was it a Stoli Gibson or
Stoli Gibson with 3 pearl onions.
and Frasier says, and I love this, he doesn't miss a beat. He
Yeah.
goes, now says, with 3 pearl onions. And Frasier goes, if you bring him 2, if you bring him 4, he'll send it back. Oh, and for you, the same.
Which also, Fraser and Niles' drinks of choice here are fucking nasty. Like these are the most disgusting cocktails I've ever heard of. Um,
Listen, like, I don't know anything about the drink before the onion part, but once you said the 3 pearl onions, you lost me.
well,
Like,
for those who don't know, a Stoli Gibson is literally just a martini, but instead of olives, you use onions. And I don't like martinis to begin with. I think martinis on their own are kind of gross. And I don't mind onion as a food, but I've never looked at one and been like, that needs to be in a drink. Like,
yeah, that's just
yeah, so
ugh.
I think martinis are gross to begin with, but I feel like adding onions to them does not make them any better. In fact,
Yeah.
I found a Reddit post before we started tonight where somebody like was there was like a thread of people trying to recreate cocktails from Frasier, and this was one of them. And the fucking poster just at the end said, "Final verdict: It's honestly kind of nasty,"
Yeah.
and that was it.
So they sit down, and you get to see more of the divide in their dynamic,
Hmm.
the boys and their father. And so Niles shares a story of one of his patients having a Freudian slip. He meant to say, pass the salt, but he said to his wife, you ruined my life, you bloodsucker. And and obviously Frasier thinks that's funny. And then Martin just deadpans, well, I bet she didn't like that. No,
No,
Dad,
Dad.
she didn't. So then he tells about how like all of his friends are unfortunately passing away while and I don't know if anyone else noticed this. I don't know. I couldn't tell by the laughter if the audience was picking up on this, but while he's talking about his friends passing away, he's putting so much fucking butter on his
Yeah,
roll. It's making me uncomfortable.
like by the time he eats the roll, like it's more butter than it is bread.
Yes. And it's like, bro, your heart's going to stop by lunchtime tomorrow. So anyway, they we get to see how they pick their steaks, which is, of course, from a thing called the beef trolley.
Which, you know
And
what, I gotta say, I know this place is supposed to be like beneath Niles and Fraser's standards, but in all honesty, this seems like a pretty like legit place. Like you're choosing your cut of steak from a full on like dressed up trolley. Like I
yeah,
don't know, it definitely it's this ain't Applebee's is all I'm saying.
well, like actually, I kind of am following your logic there because if they're so particular, and someone like in the same genre of a person as Fraser Niles, if they're so particular and whatnot, it kind of does make the point of, well, why don't you just fucking bring all the meat up and let them see it for themselves beforehand? Like
Right?
that kind of does make sense. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, I see what you're saying. That does seem like a feature that would be at one of their snooty snobby restaurants.
Yeah.
um I mean, you get to pick out the lobster you want at some places, so which is kind of fucked up if you think about it.
A little bit.
um but anyway, so Niles orders his steak, which I
Oh
need you
my
to help me
god.
on this. He wants it lean, but not too lean. Not so much that it leaves drippings or. It's like I want it lean, not so fat that it leaves drippings, but not so lean that it lacks flavor. I want it pink, true pink, and any which way one or the other, and it is ruined. And the waitress is just like, okay. And then finally, my favorite one was, and for you, and Fraser's just so unsure and he's so reluctant. He just weakly points and goes, "Can I see the other side of that one?" And then finally, Martin's like, "Oh, for God's sake, we'll take those 3 medium rare with all the fixins." And cut to my pop thinking that the Roy's Fixins bar was just funny as shit. So finally, um, it cuts to them, just starting their salads from the bar. And and this is one of my favorite little quips too, was uh Martin going, "Oh, they have the best Thousand Island dressing here." And, and Frasier just goes, "I know, Dad. I saw the certificate by the register."
Hey, that wasn't a certificate. It was a plaque. Put some respect
Sorry,
on
yes,
there.
yes, yes, Dad. I saw the plaque by the register. Like, at a certain point, this does feel like some shit that would be right around the 21502.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, God. By the way, that chili, thumbs down.
Oh man, that's a great story. I'll have to tell that on
Well,
here sometime.
yeah, or one day we should just have him tell it himself.
Yeah.
So anyway, cut to them coming up, and they've barely had time to touch their salads. They're taking him away, and he's like, "Oh yeah, great service, huh?" And Niles is like, "Oh yes, we'll be getting the full dining experience in less than 20 minutes." And so they bring their steaks, and Frasier's just like, "Oh well, let's just go ahead and hurry up before our dessert, which should be any minute now." And my this
Also,
reminded me.
I just want to
Look, go
say,
ahead.
like the waitress here is a absolute hero. Like putting up with
What, just
these
keeping her cool? Yeah.
snobby, yeah,
I want to say though, while they were being kind of shitty about the place itself, I didn't really see how they were being directly shitty to her personally. I didn't really get that from it, but
yeah.
maybe it was just like them, just maybe it was just the whole aura of them. But anyway, this reminded me of a quip you would have had, which was Martin just saying, "Sometimes you just need a really good steak, don't you?" And Fraser just goes, "I wish this was one of those times."
Yeah.
That reminded me of when I'm not going to say his last name, but um, a certain Nick that we think is a stupid asshole. He just posted that one selfie and said, "Some days I take good selfies," and you just go, "Well, today wasn't one of them."
And the best part of that was his girlfriend at the time liked the comment.
Yeah, well, she was tougher than him anyway. Moving on.
Lumberjack.
Uh, so so finally, um, Martin's like, "Well, I'll have you know that these steaks are. What the hell are you doing?" And he's looking over at Niles, and Niles just goes, "There seems to be something in my potato." And he goes, "Those are bacon bits." And he goes, "I didn't order bacon bits. You ordered the fixins. You got the fixins." And he goes, "But I can't have bacon." And he goes, "It's okay. These are artificial. They're made out of soy." And Fraser just goes, "Well, they certainly look after your health here, don't they?" But that's one of my dad's favorite quips. But the following one is the one that makes him and my mom just hoot and holler, which was finally Martin being like, "All right, I've had enough of you two. Let's just go ahead and eat your food and stop your bullshit." Basically, to sum it up, and you can see both Kelsey Grammer and David Hyde Pierce start to break character, and they're
Yeah.
trying their goddamn hardest to deliver the next few lines, and they just go, "Hey, Niles, is Maris still in charge of the art council dinner?" And he goes, "Why, yes, maybe I should recommend this place. I'd like to be a fly on that wall." And he just goes, "You would be the only one."
It's one of the
Oh,
pettiest quips ever.
it is high class petty.
Yeah.
It is so petty. I mean, it is worthy of that one meme that I fell in love with, of that one shitty double decker Mini Coupe being on Facebook Marketplace, and the top comment is this still available?" And the seller goes, "Yeah," and the comment goes, "Not surprised." But anyway, so Martin gets up, and he's basically like, "You two, I wish you would take after your mother, because she may have had taste, but she had too much class to ever make anyone feel second rate.
hmm
And you've done nothing but make me feel little. You've made everyone else feel small. I'm out of here. I'm going." And he's going to Duke's for a nightcap.
Yeah.
And Fraser's just like, "Niles, do something." And Niles' last ditch effort was, "Wait, Dad, the mud pie's coming." So they sit down, and the final bit is them being disappointed in themselves, ashamed of themselves, just sorry that they made such an embarrassment. And Niles asks the question of Frasier, have we become snobs? Have we become too snooty to enjoy the finer things in life? Steaks, potatoes, fixins? And Frasier's like, well, obviously this is what's the thing he says?
He
It's
says, I don't see anybody else driving their father to go drink by himself.
right. And he said, but this does seem like decent, good
Yeah,
food.
he
I mean,
said
it
this is
isn't
this
any.
is good, wholesome American fare. Is
Yes,
what he
yes. And he's
says.
like, sure, it's not anything super fancy, but this is good, wholesome American fare. And they make the pact to go ahead and finish their meals like good boys, let their dad cool down at Duke's, and then they'll go apologize to him. So they start to chew on their steaks, and then they keep chewing on their steaks, and then they're still chewing on their steaks. And Niles is like, "Oh, Frasier, look who's here!" And he tries to get rid of his baked potato with all the fixins, and Frasier just catches him. And well, then from there it's just the visual comedy of their mannerisms and whatnot of that meal being apparently super frustrating to consume. And that's basically the episode.
And of course, during the credits, we see like the restaurant is closing, they're cleaning up, and they're still there trying to finish the meal.
Yeah, I think I would have just skipped to the dessert on that one, especially since it was free because of the cut tie.
Right? And it was a
Yeah.
mud pie.
Yeah, yep, it sure was.
And that kind of to go back to Martin really giving Frasier and Niles, a serious talking to, a serious wake up call. Like I said earlier, I feel like this is the first episode where we really get to see like how much their mother meant to their dad, and not just Frasier and Niles. When he
Yeah.
talks about like, yeah, your mom loved the fancy stuff too, but she also liked going to a ball game once in a while. She would even eat a hot dog, and like I just love that line. She was too classy to make anybody ever feel like they were second rate. And yeah, I think it's a great line, and it really just shows like that maybe Frasier and Niles kind of had their mother all wrong, or had their family dynamic all wrong, um, in some ways. And yeah, I love that Frasier and Niles do redeem themselves by at least trying to eat the food, um, because it's still, it doesn't paint them entirely as the villains, because there's still that lingering like aspect of maybe the food really is just like not good.
Yeah. It is fair that like okay, it really is like a rough place. And that is where like I love this show way more than I ever loved Seinfeld. And with Seinfeld, it just kind of soured over time to me. Like in middle school, I thought Seinfeld was great, but then over time, I was like, Seinfeld was it wasn't just petty. Like Seinfeld was kind of mean spirited to the point where it's like I just can't root for them. And with Seinfeld, like it even specifically had an anti morality to it. Like Larry David was like no hugging, no clapping. Like they have to end the episode not understanding why or how they were the assholes, which I guess is okay for an episode here and there, but for a whole series, it's like I don't know. Maybe I don't want anyone else that actually likes Seinfeld to hear that and be like, "Wow, you're kind of missing the point there." But at least with Frasier, you do get that closure and clarity of whoever was wrong was able to admit, okay, you know what, I was being a dick and I'm sorry.
Yeah,
And that is where I will always admire this show
yeah,
more is that sometimes at the end of the day you do want a sense of morality even from something that's just supposed to be funny.
yeah.
So those are my final feelings on it for tonight.
Yeah, I think this is a great episode. I think, like you said, like this is the episode where we really start, first two episodes we got the world built, we got our characters settled in, we, know how they tick for the most part. This is the episode where, as once again, to use your analogy, the car is on the road now. Um, and I think this episode overall is, it does a great job at really showing us the dynamic of the three Crane men, and how they interact with each other, and just again, I really like that we kind of got some more of how their mother's specter still influences them and how they interact with each other in this episode. Um,
Yeah.
So yeah, overall, great episode. Just another great episode, and this series is still going strong with its start here in the early part of the first season.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Well, if you got nothing else to add, we can go ahead and end it here.
Oh no, it's bedtime.
Yeah, it's bedtime for you anyway. But on that note, thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back next episode. Be sure to follow us on all the social media: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at Fat Minute Radio. You can also listen to us on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. So, on that note, thank you, fuck you, good night.